I wanted to start with a little story from my trip because I think it'll set up what I want to talk about with this psalm here today. We took a little road trip. Just say thank you to my wife. She let me do it my way, which means we did not book a hotel until we were on our way to the next town, which is my way of doing life. You might be like, yeah, that sounds like you, Dave, but not Allie. So we did that, and so let's see where the wind blows. So we ended up going up to Whistler in Canada, and then from Whistler we drove on this amazing highway, Highway 1, all the way across British Columbia into Calgary and ended up in Banff, and from Banff we drove down into Montana, and it was awesome. So, but on this drive, and I'd never done this drive, from Whistler to Banff, you drive on Highway 1 in Canada, and it's a truly amazing drive. If you want a long, it's long, but it's amazing. And my boys did great. And there were two big observations I want to share that will kind of lean us into this psalm. The first is this: the mountains of Canada, just gotta be honest, are objectively more beautiful than the mountains of the United States. Okay. Let's just be honest. Honesty breeds freedom. Freedom breeds honesty. You say, well, how can you say that, Dave? Okay, so hit after hit after hit. I'm not talking about the deer on the road. Okay, so hit after hit, meaning like every next mile, there was another amazing, majestic peak, another serene lake. It was just like hit after hit. And I couldn't believe it. It just kept coming. 10 hours of driving across, it just kept coming. Beauty after beauty after beauty. And now if there was just one site that was like objectively more beautiful, I might not have made that comment that the Canadian mountains are more beautiful. But the thing is that the consistency and the longevity of these amazing vistas just lead me to this conclusion. Canadian mountains are greater than any other mountains in North America. You see what I'm saying? Just one moment, just one view, maybe I could hold on to my U.S. pride here. But they just kept coming at me, these Canadians. And it was amazing to see. And so I can't deny it anymore because of the consistent amazement that I was under for that entire drive across Highway 1. If you ever do it, come talk to me and you'll see what I'm talking about. The second thing that I noticed, or that I thought of, and you probably thought of this too, but just the sheer magnitude and scale of God's creation just hit me in the face. This is one of the reasons I love road trips. You fly over these things, and you might not even realize what you've flown over. You drive them. Of course, the best way, as many would say, would be to hike them. And I get that. But at least driving, you just see the magnitude and the scale of God's creation. You think about the way that God created this. How does God paint the beauty of His creation? And I realize that is part of the glory of God. Not just what He painted, but how He painted it, right? And so God paints His creation in a far more creative way than we might have painted it. God's using everything to paint this picture, and that should give us even more reverence for Him. He didn't just snap His fingers and it just appeared. This isn't AI. He has used tools over time to create these things. His chisel was ice. His brush was water. His paint was the organic growth of seeds planted that bloom into 1,000 colors. That's how God filled His canvas. And so this drive, and many of you have experienced this, really lines up with where I'll get at the end of this sermon. And it's actually the title that I've given to this talk as well, is that God really is the King who paints beauty with time. The King who paints beauty with time. And I've stolen that from a song that I'm going to share with you later. It's always a song with me, isn't it? Yeah. You say, Dave, how can I come to this conclusion from the majesty of the Canadian mountains? Well, I've just told you. But then you say, well, I heard what Gregor just read. How did you come to that same conclusion from what Gregor just read? Psalm 18. A song that's about God's protection, the crushing of King David's enemies, and so on. How do I come to the conclusion that God is the king who paints beauty with time from that? Let me explain. First, I want to look at the text itself. I don't have time. There's 50 verses. I don't have time to get into all of the details. I want to point out just a couple things from the text, and then I'm going to talk mainly in the sermon about the context. Okay, so the text itself, there's a beautiful thing here that you might not see. So verse 1 says this, I love you, Lord. That's Yahweh. I love you, Yahweh, my strength. Okay? Now you might just read over that and skim over that. Right. I know that King David, who is the one that's writing this, that he loves God. I've heard that before. But actually, you haven't heard that before. Because the Hebrew word for love here is totally unique to this psalm. So the Hebrew word, RHM, is an incredibly rare word in the biblical text to talk about love. There's many other words that are more common, but right here in this passage we have, unique in all the Psalms, this word for love. So why does David use this word for love? Well, this is actually an even more intimate form of the idea of love, or the verb to love. You might say it like this. It's the difference between saying, I love you on your wedding day versus saying, I love you on your 50th wedding anniversary. Now, some of you are like, well, those must be the same things, or you must think, no, when you say it on your wedding day, that's the highest acclaim of love. Just go talk to somebody that's been married more than 15 years. Yeah. Yeah, you hear them? They're all going, yep. They're not the same. Okay. Both are love, but there's a difference because time got in between. Now, if you think of it this way. The work that God's done in David's life is a work that's been happening over and over and over again. God has been showing up to David over and over and over again. You can study the history of David's life and you can see God showed up again and again and again. So much so that the only way to articulate what his reciprocal love to God is like is to use this totally unique word that he'd never used before. And we'll see why that is in a sec. But this is the kind of love that expresses being loved in a way that no one else has loved you before. And so I had the privilege, shout out to Joshua and Dorothy, got married on Friday night. Yeah, Joshua and Dorothy, okay. Then these guys blew me away with their wedding speeches. If you guys might not know this, Shanna, Joshua's sister, she can really give a wedding speech, man. This was incredible. You should ask her about this. But then Joshua and Dorothy got up, and they gave the most amazing thank you speeches. And it just blew me away. And I was thinking about that, and thinking about just the way that, and I could have picked any relationship here, but I'm going to focus in on this one because I think as a son with a mother, I feel this one deeply. But like the way Joshua talked about his mother, the way he was loved by her, and therefore him thanking her and expressing his love to her, is a little bit of what's similar to what's happening here with David articulating his love for God. So I heard Joshua talking about the way his mother had loved him again and again and again. And in fact, if you study this Hebrew word for love, it is most closely aligned with a motherly love. And then what it feels like to express back to someone who has loved you like a mother loves you, what that might feel like, that kind of intimacy. That's the word David uses here. Because when a mother loves you, she loves you again and again and again. You yell at her and she loves you again. You tell her she's the worst and she loves you again. Before you even knew how to ask for anything, she loved you. This is what David has experienced in his relationship with God. And so, perhaps someone can love you in an incredible moment or an incredible act of kindness. Perhaps someone rescued you from danger once. Perhaps you've had a romantic fling that sets the high water mark for what romantic intimacy and that kind of love feels like, what romantic chemistry at its best is like. But that's not what David's talking about here. Not just you did this for me once, it's that you did this for me again and again and again, just like my mother would. That kind of love is what's on display here. But it's not just motherly love. It's not only, mothers don't have, they're probably the best example, but there's other examples of this. I witnessed one just yesterday. Just yesterday we had Pastor Don's retirement party. Pastor Don pastored Ballard Baptist Church for 44 years. Now, there is no one moment or one act that expresses Don's love for his congregation. No one could say, you want to know what Don's love is like, and point to this one moment or this one sermon or this one hospital visit. Those all might be examples, but there's another kind of love that's on display yesterday when we celebrate 44 years of always being there. Whatever that is, that's different than any one moment or one act, or even 10 acts. That's 44 years of always showing up. That's an act of love worth celebrating because it's totally different than any other one single act. So in the psalm, what we're reading are the words of a man who has been loved by God in such a consistent and long-suffering way, time and time again, unconditionally, in every conceivable kind of situation. God showed up to protect him, to care for him, to fight for him, to bring him back from the depths. That's unlike any other kind of love that King David has experienced. That's what he means when he says, I love you, Lord. Second observation. Look at all the different metaphors he uses. Just read verse 2. Just as an example, okay? He says, the Lord, Yahweh, is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock, where I seek refuge, my shield, my horn, my salvation, my stronghold. Each of those is another metaphor. And you say, he used the same one twice, rock. No. Actually, those are two different Hebrew words that, yes, mean a large stone of sorts, but actually, if you read it in the Hebrew, this is how you'd read it. The Lord is my cliff, because God sets you on a high place where your enemies can't get you, that kind of a rock. And then the second time he says, my crag, C-R-A-G, which is a cave of salvation to protect. And if you know King David's story, you know many times he's been held in a literal crag in the rocks to protect him from his enemies. And so even the word rock has multiple memories behind it in the ways God has saved. So God has used rocks to save David in so many different ways. And so he just layers metaphor upon metaphor upon metaphor, and you just keep going, story upon story. We have some sort of big anamorphisms here of God as sort of his nostrils breathing out smoke and fire, and There's ways that God's shown up like that, similar to, you could read about that in Mount Sinai, like David's experienced God showing up in so many different ways because God is so many different things to him. And so piling up these metaphors is no accident. It's not bad songwriting. Some of you are like, oh, this is how I wrote my first love song. I just piled metaphor of, I love you like the highest high of the mountain and like the length of the river. I wrote a love song once that was like that. It didn't work. Don't ask Allie about it. It wasn't for her. It didn't work out. Okay, so that's not what's going on. He's just, because of the longevity of his relationship with God, he has so many different ways in which God has been his deliverer, his redeemer, his protector, his savior, his friend. He who goes before and fights his battles for him. And David just has so much here, and so he's got to write it. Not one word for rock will do. God's too unique. God's too varied. God's too imaginative for that. And David is telling us, I can't tell you how many ways God has been my rock. So let me try to put it into a song for you. Third observation. This is why I'm so thankful for Gregor for reading this. This is the third longest psalm in the whole songbook of Jesus. I like to call the Psalms like Jesus' playlist. 150 of them. And it's the longest song of thanksgiving. So the only two psalms that are longer aren't psalms of thanksgiving. They're other kinds of psalms, psalms of lament, and it is typically easier to write about our trouble than it is God's deliverance. So this is really long. It's a really long, so why such a long song? Why all these metaphors? Why this unique word for love? Let me explain why. Turn with me to 2 Samuel 22. 2 Samuel 22. If you've got one of these Bibles in the seat back in front of you, that's going to be on page 283. So 1st and 2nd Samuel are historical narratives of the beginning of the kingship in Israel. So we just finished our sermon series in Joshua. So after Joshua, there's a series of judges who weren't kings, but they sort of led the people, and then the people clamor for a king, and they give them a king. It's King Saul. We read about that at the very beginning of 1 Samuel, and then David ends up taking over, becomes the new anointed, and he's in a long struggle with Saul. Saul tries to kill him, and then Saul dies, and then Saul's heirs try to kill David, and there's a long civil war, and da-da-da-da-da-da. Lots of things happen, and that's all recorded for us in 1st and 2nd Samuel. And then at the end of 2 Samuel, so there's only 24 chapters in 2 Samuel. So at the very end, there's an entire chapter, chapter 22, and I want you to read the beginning of it to you. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Ready? 2 Samuel 22. This is the very end of David's life and reign as king. It says this: David spoke the words of this song to the Lord, to Yahweh, on the day the Lord rescued him from the grasp of all his enemies and from the grasp of Saul. Now, let me pause right there. Do you think David wrote that? I mean, which one are we talking about? If you know the story of David, God rescued David from Saul many times. So when did he write this? And I think the answer is after it was all over. And really, David wasn't rid of Saul and all of his enemies until the very end of his life. So I think he's writing this at the very end of his life. And what song did he write? Let's read it. Just the beginning. The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my rock, where I seek refuge, my shield, the horn of my salvation, my stronghold, my refuge, my Savior. You saved me from violence. Recognize that? This is almost verbatim what we have written for us in Psalm 18. And it's right here in a historical narrative. So probably what happened is this song was a song that David composed at the very end of his life, recounting everything that God had done, what God was like, his sort of final song, his swan song, his life song. And he writes it here, and it's recorded for us in the narrative. And then probably what happened is some music director, sounds like a Tylene, found the song, found the poem, and made some minor adjustments to make it a song that could be sung for the whole congregation of God's people. You can think of it this way, and this is why it's so important to know that this isn't common, okay, to have a whole psalm written in a historical narrative. Think about it this way. If you're watching the movie Wicked, it's chocked full of songs everywhere. Like, that's kind of the whole point. It's like a tricky way to get non-Broadway people excited about Broadway. If you didn't know that, that's what's going on in Wicked. Great movie. But it's songs everywhere. It's a musical on the big screen. That's not what this psalm is. Instead, imagine you're watching the movie Oppenheimer. And then all of a sudden, at the very end of the movie, Cillian Murphy, who plays Oppenheimer, breaks out into song. You think you'd want to pay very close attention to the lyrics of that song? Yeah. It's unique to see song in the middle of narrative. It's not the only time this happens, but it's very rare. And so that makes this psalm totally unique, which is why I want to focus on the context of it and what story that tells us even more than the detail. The detail is amazing. Look at it. There's so much to unpack there, but the context really is incredible. This is David's life song. This is what he sings at the end of his life. He's telling us, do you want to know who really is behind all of my longevity and all of my victories? It wasn't me. He knows it wasn't him. It was God. Again and again and again, God showed up for me. You could say this: King David knew who the real sovereign was. It wasn't him. He knows he has the title of king. He knows he's like a stand-in, a representative for, but he knows who the real king is, and that's God himself. God's really the king of the world. God is really the one to be praised and honored and lifted up. And King David is the most famous, the most revered king of all of Israel, still to this day. And David knew, it ain't about me, it's about God. He's really the one pulling all the strings. He's the one winning all my victories. He's the one protecting me. He's my king. And in verse 43, you may have seen that, David alludes to it. He's not just my king or the king of Israel, he's the king of all the nations. So a life lived under God's rule has led David to this beautiful and deep expression of gratitude. Gratitude for the grace that he has received time and time again. If you know David's story, you know he didn't deserve it. So there is a kind of beauty that David has witnessed that could not have come from just one God intervention. He could not have written this song in the way that he's written, with the word love as he's used, with all these metaphors, just from God delivering him from the hands of lions and bears when he was a shepherd in the field as a young man. He couldn't have written this. He couldn't even have written this even after God helped him slay Goliath. Couldn't have written this. He couldn't have written this after God worked on his behalf against all of the Philistine armies and all the other armies that David won battles against. He couldn't have done it. And you know what? It wouldn't have been enough if he'd even writing about Saul's attempt to murder him. It wouldn't have been enough. Or God rescuing him from the hand of his own son, Absalom, who tried to usurp the throne from his father. He couldn't have written this psalm for any one particular act of rescue, deliverance, or redemption. This is a song that's written upon a deep reflection upon an entire life filled with grace, both common grace and special grace poured out on David by God. That's a different kind of song. Now look at verse 50. Psalm 18, verse 50. It ends like this. It says, He, that's God, gives great victories to his king. He shows loyalty to his anointed, to David and his descendants forever. Forever. So I think there's an implicit understanding in the language of this psalm that both points to the fact that David knows he's definitely not in control, but God is, and he's definitely not the king of kings. Like he knows that there is coming a king because God has promised David this, that from his line, from his descendants will come the king, the anointed one, the Messiah who will fulfill everything that's actually in this psalm. So look at verse 20, for instance. Look at verse 20 with me. David writes this, Yahweh rewarded me according to my righteousness. He repaid me according to the cleanness of my hands. You say, like, hold on. David did some stuff. Like, do you know that David saw a woman bathing and said, I want her, had his servants bring her, committed adultery with her, and then sent her husband to the front lines to be slaughtered to hide his sin? Whose hands are clean? David's? No. No. Who could possibly fulfill verse 20? David's fully aware of his own shortcoming, his temporality. He knows he won't live forever. How could he be the one? He knows his rule and reign are incomplete. If you know the story, it doesn't really go well after David. I mean, he taught his sons some things, but clearly not enough. So he's looking forward to the coming of a king who God promised from his lineage, born in his hometown of Bethlehem, who would be the king to fulfill this. A king to end all kingships, the King of Kings, who will crush Satan, because it's not just the physical world that needs crushing, it's the spiritual world, the powers of darkness, the forces of Satan himself, fallen angels. All of that needs to be subdued like mud in the streets. Who could possibly do that? Not David. Who will ride on the clouds with consuming fire for the darkness that will wipe sin away, as is alluded to in Psalm 18, 7-15. Who could that possibly be? Well, the book of Revelation gives us an answer. The book of Revelation tells us that this is actually the King of Kings, Jesus Christ himself. David knows that. He knows he's not the King of Kings. And so the greatest king of ancient Israel is so excited to bow his knees to God and look forward to the coming of this greater king, the new anointed, to finish the work that he started, that he could not fulfill. That's what David sings of. So on our road trip, I've heard this song before. It's been on the Sideris playlist, actually. There's a Sideris playlist on Spotify. You could look it up. And some people ask me this, I can't afford Spotify. You can get a free account on Spotify. There's some features that you can only get with premium, but anybody could get it. So you could download the app, go to the Sideris music playlist, and I've put it at the very top of the list, this song. So I'm going to play it for you in a second. But Allie and I were listening to this a ton on our road trip. We loved it. It's my new favorite song. And the words of this song remind me so much of something that King David might have sung. So it's kind of like if King David had an acoustic guitar and boots, like cool hipster boots and skinny jeans. Like this is the song that he would have wrote that might have been his life song. That's how I hear this song, okay? And the words of this song are going to remind you of Ecclesiastes. Do you know who most scholars think wrote Ecclesiastes? David's son, Solomon. And what I was thinking as I was listening to this song, I said, oh, that's like totally inspired by Ecclesiastes. But I was like, what's Ecclesiastes inspired by? Probably David. David probably talked to his son Solomon all the time about God's longevity, and how there's a time for everything. The name of the song is called Time. There's a time for everything. And in every season, there's a king who rules and reigns over it. And David had probably taught that wisdom to his son. And of course, God was with Solomon and gave him wisdom, but my guess, the greatest wisdom that I have and I share comes from things I got from my parents. I bet Solomon got some of this wisdom from David. Probably David singing Psalm 18 all the time, particularly at the end of his life. God's been with me in all these ways, in all these seasons. He saved me time and time again. He's always there. And I should crown him king. And so I want you to reflect on this song with me. We're going to have the words on. I just want you to listen to it. Because I could imagine David singing this song at the end of his life, speaking about what it's been like to trust in God all these years. Let's listen to it together.
My feet have known the snow, but mine eyes have seen the glory of a seed begin to grow. There is a time to uproot, darling, but most days just hold on tight. For there's a time for darkness, honey, but dawn will always beat the night. Sometimes death will come calling when you've been good and warned, and other times it's cold hands will cradle dreams yet to be born. There is a time to dance on sorrow and a time to kiss her cheek. There is a time to mourn in silence, but justice aches to hear you speak. I don't know the end or tomorrow's story, but I have found the one who gives me rest. And I will make my bed in his promises, for he holds true when nothing's left. Nothing's left. There is a time when laughter will echo through your halls of peace. War is known to change your locks, carry off the family keys. There is a time for healing and pain, a time for drought and a time for rain. There is a time for everything until we crown the risen King. crown him when you bury, and crown him when you marry, and crown him when your faith finds a spark. Crown him for he's faithful, and crown him for he's worthy, and crown him for he is good. Crown him for his promises, caught through the blindness of children that have barely understood. The beauty that is calm, the beauty yet to come, the beauty that is yours and that is mine. That death produces life, and we are made alive by the King who paints beauty with time. By the King who paints beauty with time. By the King who paints beauty with time. I don't know the end or tomorrow's story, but I have found the one who gives me rest. And I will make my bed in his promises, where he holds true when nothing's left. When nothing's left.
I don't know what God brought to your mind as you listened to that. I've listened to that song dozens of times now, and he even brought new things to mind as I listened then. I just love the line, and I could hear David singing this line. And I will make my bed in his promises. That's the testimony of David's life. He made his bed in the promises of God. At every turn, he never took things into his own hands. He trusted God and his promises. And I think David would sing this over us. He is the King who makes beauty with time. The greatest beauty God will paint in your life will not come in a singular moment. It will not come in a singular season. So don't judge God by any one moment or any one season or any one hardship or any one celebration. God is a God who paints beauty over the long haul. His chisel, his brushes, his strokes may be painful at times, but he is preparing you for a glory that you cannot see in full now. But one day, you'll look back, or one day, your grandchildren will drive along your Highway 1, and they will see the majesty and beauty and the handiwork of God in your life. And with clarity, you will know and they will know that there is a King, and it's no mere mortal, but it's the God-man Jesus Christ, who over the course of your life has made beauty with time. Will you trust him to do that? Every morning you must wake up, just like David, and decide, will I make my bed in his promises, or will I take things into my own hands? Let's pray.